SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by Olive Juice 28. Chapter 18. Great Ideas and Expectations. Bill Weasley jumped in startled confusion as the door to his office opened at exactly the same time his flue roared to life. All at once, he was staring at two young men who had previously forgotten would be using the space for that weekly meeting. "Harry, Draco," he nodded at each in return. "Sorry, lost track of time. I'll be out of your hair in just a second." He stood and started shuffling papers and packing his bag. "No rush," Harry replied, flopping down into one of the chairs in front of Bill's desk. "Yeah, I think we might even be a minute or two early," agreed Draco, as he also sat down, with slightly more finesse, in a matching wingback. "Everything going all right for you boys?" Both responded affirmatively, and the professor slung his bag over his shoulder and grinned at them before bidding them good night and heading out the door. "So, anything new, Malfoy?" Harry was wiping his glasses on his robes, but seemed to be merely smudging the ever-present fingerprints instead of actually making any improvements. "Not really," drawled Draco. "Think I'm going to start my own Quidditch team." That caught Harry's attention, and he gave up cleaning his glasses and turned to face his friend. "What now?" Draco launched into an explanation of the growing groups that he's been working with on Sunday afternoons. He shared some of the more entertaining moments and didn't bother trying to hide his pride in the progress many of the young charges had been making. Harry watched him intently, enjoying both the stories as well as the happiness that seemed to radiate off the former Slytherin as he spoke. It was abundantly clear that Draco enjoyed working with the younger students, which was mildly surprising, but terrific all the same. "Are all of your housemates' first years coming to you for flying lessons?" Harry asked. "Not all, but more than half. All three of Granger's, both of Longbottom's, Luna's, and Daphne's, one each from Hannah, Anthony, and Padma, plus my own two. Thomas actually meets with his on Saturday for lessons, which they started bugging him for after they heard about my own group. He also helps a couple of the students who can't make it to the other Sundays." "Have you gotten Hermione up on a broom yet?" Harry asked with a smirk. Draco snorted. "Pretty sure you know the answer to that one." "I've never understood her aversion to it. For everything she's done, all the crazy, impossible things she's faced, and she flat-out refuses to get back on one," Harry grumbled, thinking about his best friend and her stubborn streak. "I even tried to play the 'look what a great example you'll set' card, and she just glared at me and plopped herself down on the grass right on the spot." Draco chuckled at the memory of her curls blowing in the wind, her brows knit in defiance, and her lips pursed together. He'd had a split-second desire to swoop down and kiss her, to wipe the scowl off her face, and had to immediately redirect his thoughts. He didn't think it would be a good idea to share that moment of temporary insanity with the chosen one. "The only way is to trick her," Harry pondered out loud. "You'd have to make a wager, with her getting on the broom again being one of the outcomes. She won't back down from a challenge, and she would never renege on a deal." A mischievous grin started to spread across his face. Draco barked out a laugh and shook his head. "Sure, and have my Sir for supper. No thanks. I might not have been best friends with a Gryffindor princess for the last 8 years, but I definitely know better than to try and trick her into anything." Harry shrugged, but he was still considering his idea with merit. "You never know." "Yeah, well, you feel free to plot that all out. Let me know how it goes," Draco chuckled. "In the meantime, I do have something to discuss that can realistically be accomplished." "And what is that?" "The next portrait." Draco's tone of voice was immediately less jovial, and he reached into his pocket to pull out several photographs. He handed them to Harry, and watched as the green eyes that stared at the images took on a slight sheen. Looking up at Draco, Harry cleared his throat. "Colin Creevey." Draco nodded. "Where did you get these pictures?" "His brother's. Andrew's been coming to me for flying lessons since October, and Dennis actually came out to the pitch a few Sundays ago to watch. I talked with him for a bit afterwards and asked him if he had any photographs I could borrow. They both brought me some yesterday." Harry glanced back down at the sandy-haired boy who was smiling in each photo. He felt the familiar twinge of guilt he always did when he thought of Colin. He should have been nicer to the boy, more patient with him. He sometimes felt that he should have prevented him from joining the fight, even though he knew that that would have been impossible. He had no idea Colin had come back. How could he have? And yet, it was a great regret he didn't think he would ever be rid of. "Potter?" Harry raised his head and met the cool gray stare of the least likely of his friends, and knew he found understanding there. "I'd like to be there for this one, if that's all right." Harry nodded. "Of course. I'm sure it would mean a lot to Andrew to have you there. I'll talk to Kingsley and McGonagall and see if we can arrange a day for the boys to go home, and I can come here and bring you with me." Draco thanked him, and then asked after his mother. "She's good," Harry smiled. I was just over there on Tuesday, and she was telling me about her plans to redecorate a few of the guest rooms. She's keeping busy. Andromeda and Teddy have gone to visit a couple of times, which I know she greatly enjoys." Draco nodded in agreement. His mother had written about spending time with her sister and great-nephew in a letter she had passed through Harry last week. He was very thankful for the renewal of their relationship and knew it meant the world to her. It also gave him some peace of mind knowing that Narcissa wasn't always alone. The manor was a large and lonely place when house elves were your only company. Harry studied the pale blonde across from him. It was hard to believe that this was the same schoolmate who had tormented him and his friends for 6 years, and who had stood on the wrong side of the war. He knew people could change, but this transformation in Draco over the last 7 months was astounding. The trademark sneer was gone, as was the stiff, cold nature. He couldn't remember the last time a biting or derogatory comment had been uttered, and the prejudiced superiority was nowhere to be found. Harry felt no small measure of pride in the obvious efforts the former Slytherin was making, and it eased the constant weight of grief and remorse he still carried with him. These changes were what he had fought for, and what they all had fought for, and to see it so clearly unfolding in front of him made him feel like it may have all been worth it more than he originally thought. The second Saturday in December, Dean and Hermione decided to switch things up a bit. The game nights had been going splendidly, and had become the highlight of the week for most of their housemates. After dinner that night, once everyone was gathered in their usual circle in front of the fire, Dean waved his wand and a large black rectangle appeared on the mantel, having been disillusioned until the time came for his big reveal. Next to it was a small, flat box with the letters DVD on it. "Tonight, we're going to watch a movie," he announced happily. "A what?" asked Neville. "What's that?" questioned Padma, pointing to the unknown object. "It's a television," said Draco knowledgeably. He remembered seeing a similar one in Hermione's living room and her explanation of what it was for. "I've heard of televisions before," started Anthony, "but they don't work here. At Hogwarts, do they?" "We figured out a way to work around the whole magic versus electricity problem, just like we did for the Halloween party," smirked Hermione. "Of course you have, since you're a bloody genius," sighed Theo dramatically, to which Hermione stuck her tongue out at him, causing Draco to frown. "So, we're not playing a game?" asked Hannah. "Not exactly," began Dean. "But what about my points?" complained Theo. "I'm in first place." Everyone laughed at the look of horror on his face, and Hermione explained. "We'll have some movie trivia once it's over, and you can earn points with that. I wouldn't dream of interrupting your winning streak." She cast him another snarky grin. "Well, that's all right then," grumbled Theo, settling back in his seat. "What movie are we watching then?" asked Daphne, putting an end to the banter between Theo and Hermione, much to Draco's relief. Dean pushed a button on the small box, and the screen came to life. "Home Alone." Draco passed around large bowls of popcorn, and Dean produced a bucket of cold bottles of butterbeer. To Draco's delight, a large assortment of candy sat in the basket on the coffee table, but as he looked at the display, he realized he didn't recognize any of them. "They're Muggle sweets," explained Hermione. "The kind you can buy in the movie theater. Can't watch a movie without proper snacks." She winked at him and glanced around, trying to decide where to sit, as their friend lunged for the candy. "Here." Draco scooted to his right, to the center of the couch, closer to Luna, who was humming tunelessly as the opening credits were playing, making room for Hermione to fit. "Thanks," she said happily, grabbing some candy and plopping down beside him. "These are candy kittens, but you're gummy, fruity things." She showed him 2 pouches, one that was watermelon-flavored and the other assorted fruit. "And these are actually American Muggle sweets." She took 2 of the boxes that rattled. "M&M's are chocolate candies, and Reese's Pieces are peanut butter ones. I thought you'd like these best." She finished with a shy smile. Draco's heart was behaving oddly. It felt like it had grown in size, and it was trying to beat its way out of his rib cage. All this over a couple of small boxes of candy? A part of his old self wanted to scoff at the ridiculousness of it, but a much bigger part of him was quite content to take the box of M&M's with a smile and a genuine thanks. The fact that she didn't seem to have picked anything out specifically for Theo didn't hurt either. The movie played, and the group gasped and laughed in all of the right places. Draco enjoyed the crazy antics on the screen, and found himself often distracted by the witch at his side. Every time Hermione shifted even the slightest bit, another part of her brushed up against him. Her shoulder, her arm, her hip, her thigh. And every time it sent a subtle tingle sensation coursing through his entire body. He tried to stay as still as possible, afraid if he moved at all she would shift away from him. By the end of the movie, she had pulled her legs up crisscrossed on the couch, so her right knee was overlapping his left thigh. and the entire length of her right arm, from her shoulder to her elbow, was pressed against his. During one hilarious scene, she had leaned even further into him, giggling hysterically. He found himself laughing along with her, more because her joy was contagious than anything else. He was the most content he had been in ages, a warmth filling him that had nothing to do with the roaring fire. He was honestly sorry the movie was ending. If this is what watching Muggle movies had to offer, he'd be quite happy to participate regularly. As the end credits began, Anthony asked, "Are all Muggles really that dumb?" "Yeah," said Padma. "Could a young boy honestly trick those two robbers so well?" "Imagine if he had magic," mused Hannah, which launched a discussion about what Kevin could have done if he was a wizard. Eventually, Dean asked a handful of trivia questions about the movie, awarding points accordingly at the end of that. To no one's surprise, allowed Theo to maintain his slight lead. "Before we end tonight's gathering, though," called Hermione to the room at large, getting up from her comfortable spot next to Draco, "we have one more thing to discuss." All eyes turned to her as she stepped up to the fireplace and turned to face them. "Dean and I thought it would be brilliant to do Secret Santas this last week, before the Christmas holidays." She paused, allowing her housemates to process the idea. From the furrowed brows and tilted heads, she knew at least several of them had no idea what she was referring to. "I know what Secret Santa is," announced Hannah proudly. She was a half-blood, but she had been raised entirely in the wizarding world, so it was surprising she knew this information. "My dad's family did this every year. Since he's got 9 siblings and they live all over the place, it's just easier than getting gifts for everyone." "That's great," interrupted Daphne, "but what is Secret Santa?" "Well," Hermione began, "we will each draw a person's name and keep it a secret." She looked sternly at each of them. "Every day this coming week, starting on Monday, you will leave a note or a small object for your person, something that might give them a clue as to who you are, or what their present might be. Then, on Saturday night, we will have our house Christmas party, and everyone will get to reveal whose name they had, and we'll give them a gift." She paused here, allowing the chance for discussion and questions. "What kind of gift?" asked Neville, looking nervous. "For starters, nothing too expensive," said Dean. "Let's set a limit. Gifts should be between 15 and 20 sickles. The stuff you leave during the week should be handmade or something you have accessible, not anything you have to buy. That good?" Everyone nodded and made sounds of agreement. "Where will we leave clues?" Luna wondered. Hermione walked over to a bag that had been sitting next to the hearth and picked it up. From inside, she pulled out a pile of red and white, very fuzzy, rather large socks. Or at least that's what they looked like to Draco. She held up the one on top, and he saw it had Dean's name written in it in silver glitter across the white portion. "These are the kinds of stockings Muggles hang on their mantles." She waved her wand, and all 10 of them floated over and magically stuck themselves to the mantle. It looked very festive, and Draco was irrationally pleased to see that his stocking was right next to Hermione's. Merlin's pants! Now I'm getting worked up about the placement of Christmas socks. He rolled his eyes in his mind, but his attention was drawn back to her as she continued to speak. "I think it's safe to say that we have all gotten to know each other quite well over the past 3.5 months, she smiled at everyone. "So it shouldn't be too difficult to come up with some creative and fun ideas for clues and your gifts. That being said, if you do find yourself truly stuck, come to me or Dean and we'll do our best to help you out." "Is everyone ready to pick names?" Dean asked, reaching into the bag the stockings had been in and pulling out a stack of small green envelopes. Everyone nodded and sat up a little straighter. "We really would like to keep it all a secret," reminded Hermione, "so you can just take your envelope to your room. If by some chance you've picked your own name again, let us know and we'll fix that." Dean walked around the group, allowing each person to pick an envelope from the pile he had fanned out in his hand. He let Hermione pick from the last 2, taking the remaining one for himself. "All right then," he grinned at everyone. "This concludes another successful game night. I'd suggest you use tomorrow to plan out your clues for the week. Good luck!" And with that, everyone headed towards their rooms, anxious to see which name they had chosen. Draco closed his door before tearing open his envelope and removing a small piece of parchment. The name in black ink was not the one he had been hoping for. Neville Longbottom. He had no problem with Neville. They had gotten along rather well all term, and he found he appreciated the quiet, unassuming nature of his new housemate possessed. They'd compared notes over several days for defense, and he had to admit Neville was a lot more intelligent and a lot friendlier than he'd ever given him credit for. He seemed to accept Draco's change of heart without question, and never dragged up past grievances, although he had every right to. The two had, at the very least, become acquaintances, and might even be considered friends. This thought surprised Draco, but he was pleased by it. However, if he was going to be entirely honest with himself, he had really wanted to pull Hermione's name. For a split second, he considered trying to figure out who had her, and if they'd be willing to trade. But she had been so adamant about everyone keeping it a secret, and he didn't want to disappoint her. He would play by the rules for once and hope that she might be just a little bit impressed by whatever he decided to do for her fellow Gryffindor. Across the room, Hermione had gone into her own chamber and closed the door. She stared at the envelope in her hand, unaccountably nervous. She had been pleasantly surprised when Draco made room for her on the couch and tried not to think too much of it. He was probably just being nice, she snorted to herself. Draco Malfoy doing something to be nice. Who would have thought that would be a phrase anyone would put together? She shook her head, smiling gratefully for the positive changes the tall blonde had obviously undergone this term. She had seen a side of him that she never thought existed, a side that she was actually comfortable around and looked forward to spending time with. The snarky yet amicable way that they engaged with each other made her laugh, and the genuine smile those interactions drew from him tugged at her heartstrings. She enjoyed their conversations over meals, which she realized were a daily occurrence. While most of her housemates sat in random places at the table each day, he somehow seemed to always be across from her. She thought about this for a moment. It wasn't because she was always there first. There were just as many times that he was already seated and she found herself in the chair across from him, even if there were others open. Her cheeks burned a little at the thought that her actions might be obvious to anyone, including him. She knew he considered her a friend, but she wasn't sure about anything beyond that. He used to be a terrible flirt, according to Daphne, and she was afraid she was reading more into his gestures than he meant by them. Part of her really wanted it to be his name inside the envelope, and part of her was terrified that it would be. Ripping it open, she pulled out the parchment and gasped. Draco Malfoy. Oh, good Godric, what now? Her heart was racing and her hand trembled slightly. She had wanted it to be him, and now that it was, she was at a loss as where to go, what to begin. She wanted this to be good, something meaningful. But what if he didn't want it to mean something? What if she was reading him all wrong? She wanted him to know that she genuinely accepted him as one of her friends, but she didn't want to scare him off with anything more. This was definitely going to take some serious planning. With that happy yet nerve-wracking thought, she put the parchment back in the envelope, tucked it into the back of her sock drawer, and got ready for bed.